Need to tell my fellow avocados, it's your soon to be favorite podcast. Sit down and grab a drink and get ready to hopefully learn something new about your indigenous roots. This is Shikenda, and with me I have
Witili.
Witsili. All right. So, what are we going to be talking about today, man?
We're gonna be talking about kind of the foods that make us indigenous already, because
Mhm.
I think a lot of, and I'm mostly talking about like the Mexican community, mostly the Mexican community, because I mean that's where we come from.
Right.
So I can only really talk about the Mexican community. I don't feel like I can really talk about like any other community. Does
Okay.
does, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can't go around and talk about what
Like I
other.
Yeah, I can't talk for Peruvians or for like
Exactly.
Guatemalans. I can only talk about like my experience. And for my experience, I kind of, at least from my experience, I've decolonized, because that's kind of a thing going on right now.
Right.
I think a lot of people are decolonizing. I think you recently just decolonized, right?
Yes. I guess you could say I am decolonized or in the process of completely decolonizing. It's funny
Right.
that we call it decolonizing, and it doesn't. At least for me, from everything I've seen in social media, when you hear decolonizing, it sounds kind of like I don't know, um, quote unquote. It falls into the whole wokeness movement, which is kind of played out nowadays. Like everybody's like, oh, I'm woke this, I'm woke that. So like when we come out and say, oh, we're decolonized, it's kind of like, damn, how many people are taking us serious about that? Or how do you feel about that?
I mean, I think it's better for it to be a little bit normalized
Mhm.
instead of it not being normalized, but I get where you're coming from. Like you don't want it to be just like a trend, like, oh, I'm
Yeah, exactly,
decolonizing. You
exactly.
want
Because
it to be
most of
something
mhm.
serious.
Yes, yes. How do you talk about something that is typically more of a trend movement rather than actually taking it serious and committing to pretty much what is it? The process or the movement per se. But
But
yes.
I think that happens with a lot of things. Uh, I mean, I guess in this era with social media, it happens a
Mhm.
lot because I think just people are after clout, or they're just kind of, just kind of in the same group, so they kind of just agree with it.
Yeah, I mean, shoot. Nowadays it's kind of easy to just pick a side and go with it, right?
Yeah, I think it's better to be with the crowd. Well, I wouldn't say it's better to be with the crowd, but I think people would rather be with the crowd than against the crowd.
Yeah, play it safer
Yeah,
instead of taking a chance and actually standing for their views.
yeah.
Okay.
But
Well, mhm.
today we
Yeah,
wanted to
yeah, go
talk.
ahead.
I
Mhm.
guess today we wanted to talk about like for the people that are kind of decolonizing, or people that may have like maybe an identity crisis, whether they may not know whether they're Hispanic, Latino, indigenous, or mestizo. I kind
Mhm.
of, or we kind of wanted to give you like maybe a different insight from our perspective, because some people feel like, well, I'm not indigenous if if I don't follow the old culture, like an
Yeah.
example, it's like people might feel like if I don't follow the language or the culture, whatever, I can't really consider myself indigenous. I'm just mestizo or Mexican. And kind of my perspective is that I think people already are indigenous, even though they don't recognize they're indigenous. And also, indigenous is kind of, well, it is a race. You're born indigenous, just like someone is born black or European or Asian. Like you're just born that.
Yeah.
But the culture is a little bit different. It could be like you come from Japanese culture, Chinese culture, Korean culture, right? But at the end of the day,
Mhm.
you're still Asian. Same thing with us. Like we're indigenous. We're just indigenous. Like that's, you're just born indigenous, whether you want to be or not. But then for the people that might say, well, I'm not really Mayan or whatever, or I'm from a tribe, like you don't need to be from a tribe anymore, because it's more like we're more globalized now, right? Like everybody knows just someone from Mexico is like Mexican, right?
Yes.
But I would say the same thing goes as like we recognize that a Mexican is someone that's brown, right? And the only
Hmm.
brown people that were here before the I guess the old world came to us were indigenous people, right? As
Yeah.
we know them like Native Americans, or as we know ourselves as Native Americans. So we in ourselves already recognize that we are Native Americans, but we don't claim to be Native American because we feel like, well, we don't follow the old language anymore. We not may follow the old traditions. But
Yeah.
this is what I want to talk about is that we already kind of do, right? Like tacos and pozole and tamales and like all of these things are indigenous, right? Like even guacamole, right? Or
Yeah.
a form of guacamole was already invented by the Mayans, right? All
Yeah.
these
Even
things.
the simple aspects of our lives, we don't realize that they're actually from indigenous roots or from our actual like Mexicans.
Yeah, exactly. So the fact that all of these things that we already do are already indigenous already makes us indigenous, right? Like we already eat
Hmm.
indigenous food. Our moms already make indigenous foods, right? Like cuisine and all these other things,
Hmm.
right? So it's like, and we are indigenous, right? We're indigenous. We eat indigenous food. We make indigenous food, right? The only thing that's missing is that we I'd say change our names to indigenous names again, and then in that sense, we literally are indigenous, right?
Yes.
Because tomatoes, chilies, potatoes, all these things are like indigenous, right? Like salsa,
Yeah.
all these things are already indigenous, right? And these are indigenous things we already eat, right? I'm pretty sure everybody in Christmas or Thanksgiving, at least here in America, makes tamales, pozole, which have been around before the arrival of the Spanish.
Right.
And we're still eating it today, right? So if
Yes.
that's what we make, how are we not indigenous, right? How can we not? How can some of our people feel like an imposter in claiming to be indigenous when they already eat indigenous food and make indigenous food for hundreds of years,
Hmm.
even thousands? Maybe a question for you would be like, do you feel like like food is something important to Mexicans? Do you feel like um like like I think a lot of Mexicans take pride in their food, right? Like with tamales, pozole,
Yes.
like all of
Yes.
these things. Like I think Mexicans take a lot of pride in. And my thing is that at least the thing that I see now, or I've seen since I was growing up, at least in America, is that it gets called Hispanic and Latino when it's not Hispanic or Latino food. It's indigenous food. Like tacos are indigenous, tamales, pozole, like all these other even more cuisines, right?
Yes.
Are indigenous. Like they're just indigenous, right? But it gets called Hispanic and Latino. And what that kind of does is rob from our culture, right? It robs from our people, right? Like if you look
Yeah.
up on Google, it's just called Hispanic and Latino. Almost like there is no indigenous food.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of like a lot of our food is like practically like just indigenous maybe 90% of the time, and then there's like one or two ingredients that were imported from a different country. In this case it probably would be Spain maybe.
Yeah, Spain
And
and Lebanese for like tacos
yeah.
al pastor. It was when
Yes.
Lebanese like immigrants came, and
Yeah, because at the
then
time we didn't have chickens, pork. uh
I mean how they how they like kind of like like al pastor, how they put it on that metal stick and then it's on the fire.
yes, yeah, the trompo.
Yeah, they did that. The Lebanese people brought that. Like
Okay.
they taught us how to do that. I
Okay.
believe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense because I do see like smaller smaller trompos at like Mediterranean places and stuff.
Yeah.
And they, yeah,
Yeah,
so
so they
makes
taught us
sense.
how to do that, right? But like even though they taught us how to do that, It would be the same thing as in like that was kind of brought to us, and then we put it on tacos, and then we kind of made it our own thing,
Hmm.
right? But that doesn't mean it's not indigenous, right? Because it's like it's on a tortilla, right? And then we put salsa in it, and then salsas come from indigenous or our people, right?
Yeah.
And then tortillas also come from our people. So it's like, how is it not indigenous if it was just kind of an ingredient that was borrowed, or a type of way that same type of meat that was borrowed was made?
Hmm.
Does that kind of make sense? Kind of the same way, like the
Yeah. Yeah.
Vietnamese kind of borrowed the baguette and then made it their own, and now it's called like a banh mi.
Yes. Yeah. It's funny how it just looks like a regular sandwich to me, but yeah, I didn't when I first saw the name and I saw banh mi, I was like, man, I thought it was like a plate of food or something like that. And then when I ordered it, they came out with the regular sandwich, French bread baguette. So yeah, it does make sense.
But I think a lot of Mexican people honestly think that maybe there wasn't like the cuisine that we know today
Hmm.
wasn't brought wasn't made by us, but brought by like kind of the Spaniards.
Yeah.
I don't know how truth that is, but I feel like a lot of people don't consider tacos and all these things really indigenous food, but more like Hispanic and
Why do you
Latino
think that
food.
is?
I think because it's like, well, I mean, we speak Spanish, right? And we have all Spanish names, and
Hmm.
we follow a Spanish religion, right? And we get called Hispanic and Latino. So it kind of makes sense why people would get confused and feel like it was brought to us,
Yeah.
right? But if you think of it more, it's like chilies come from us, right? So it's like, you know, to make the soup, pozole, you need chili, right?
Hmm.
So it's like, if you kind of think about it, it couldn't have originated over there. Neither could tamales and all these things. But I can see how people would get confused. Like if you haven't really done anything and then you kind of just grow up knowing everything is Spanish, then it
Hmm.
makes sense. And then get told you're Hispanic and Latino, it makes even more sense. But
Okay.
but to the people that may be, to at least anybody that listens to this, that may be considering that they might not be indigenous because they don't speak the language or follow the culture, or eat the, or have anything to do with the culture. Just know that the being indigenous is the culture. Like the food, you already eat it, right?
Yeah.
And the way it's prepared, your mom already makes it, and it like the, I guess, quote unquote, like the root of being Hispanic and Latino, at least in Mexico, is literally just being indigenous.
Hmm.
But we just don't recognize that.
Why do you feel like it's important to start off with food? Why not start off with I mean, I can't really think of an example right now, but why start off simple with food?
I think food is it's the most common thing we do every day, right?
Hmm.
Like you need to eat food to survive, right?
Right.
And every culture, like Italians, right, Thai, Japanese, everybody eats breakfast from their culture, right? Like the Japanese might, I don't want to say anything because I don't know what the Japanese eat in the morning,
Mm,
but
yeah.
like at least in England, like they have English breakfast, right?
Yes.
And like in America, we have like pancakes, eggs, right?
Hmm.
And then in Mexico, we might have, you know, huevos con tortilla.
A plate of chilaquiles.
Yeah, yeah, something like that. And it has to do with your culture, right? But
Yeah.
it's like knowing the origin of where these plates come from is important, because if you're questioning your identity and you're like, well, I'm not indigenous because of, I don't follow anything indigenous. I
Yeah.
don't even
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
an indigenous name. It's like you're eating indigenous food that your father and your grandpa and then his father and then his father and his father and his father's father have ate for a long time. Maybe not chilaquiles because we didn't have like you know crema and like cheese,
Yeah.
but we could have had something like chilaquiles because we had tortilla
Yeah,
and
we had the
salsa.
corn to make the tortilla, we
Yeah,
had the, tomato sauce, we had
yeah,
the onions? I'm not sure about the onions.
yeah. I don't think we had onions, but we had
Yeah,
the
so, I
tomatoes
mean
and all these things.
okay, and, I mean
But it's like your cuisine, like on Christmas, right? You're gonna eat
yeah,
pozole, you're gonna eat tamales, right?
mhm,
And it's like that's indigenous. You're doing an indigenous thing that your ancestors did, right?
yeah, you're
And
celebrating a a Christian holiday with, Native American food or indigenous food.
exactly. But I think going back to that, I think Christmas is more like a capitalist thing than it would be like a holiday thing nowadays.
Oh, yeah, for sure, for sure.
Just so people don't feel like you know I'm not then we shouldn't celebrate Christmas. It's like no,
Yeah,
you can celebrate Christmas kind of like the way the Japanese do. Like they don't
yeah,
care about
Christmas is awesome.
Christianity or like Jesus or anything. They just like the giving gifts and being with your loved ones. I think that's perfectly fine. Just like with
Yeah,
Halloween, right? Like the kids don't give a fuck about like whatever Halloween had to do. They just care that it's about scary stuff.
candy and
Yeah.
dressing up and pretty much just having fun. Yeah, 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 makes sense, makes sense.
But the thing with food is that if you have an imposter syndrome, like you feel like I'm not indigenous or I feel I won't belong because I don't
Mhm,
do anything, just know that you are indigenous because you eat indigenous food and you prepare indigenous food, right? Like you literally are indigenous. And if
yeah,
you come from Mexico, literally if you just go 500 years back, where do you think you were, right? If you think you were in Europe, then you're European. But if you think you were still here, then you're indigenous. And if you're indigenous, look at the food that you eat every day. If it's indigenous food, then how are you not even in like how would you not consider yourself indigenous, right?
okay,
Let me ask you a question. Do you
mhm.
think that when you were first starting to decolonize, do you think it was if you were kind of told how food played an important part in your identity, or do you feel food plays a important part in someone's identity?
Would say that the food that we eat is part of our identity in itself, but it's something that I mean, for years I never saw much importance into it because nobody really talked to me about it. I would just be like, "Oh yeah, here's a plate of food, and I'm just gonna eat it." Like, and I just took it as it was. And I mean, I would see other people around me that they would know what their food was, but I wouldn't really necessarily connect my food with my race per se or Mexican race like that. I wouldn't see it like that. But nowadays I go around and I'm like, yeah, bro, like I'm enjoying like a plate of like frijoladas or sopes. I mean, I think sopes are actually from South America, but
I
we
well
do
so,
have
well they would
the
they
other
I think
one.
they would still be considered indigenous, right? Because it's like it's made from corn and beans, and you
Yeah.
only get corns and beans from indigenous people, and it's made
Hmm.
from an indigenous country. I mean I
Hmm.
don't know if they would consider themselves an indigenous country the way I
Yeah.
consider Mexico an indigenous country, right?
Yeah.
But I would
I
say the
mean,
food itself, I mean, it tastes pretty indigenous, right? Like, I mean, if you taste like Asian food, you'd be like, oh yeah, like this is Asian food, right?
yeah.
And
Like
since
it's hard to explain, but it's like you just know when food is from a certain spot. Like most of like Middle Eastern food has a lot of like spices into it, so or you can actually smell it. Like the smell is actually pretty pungent.
yeah,
So it's like there's I mean, yeah, food definitely plays a big role
identity, I
in,
would say.
into your identity, yeah. To each their own whether they want to name their kids anything they want, right? But it seems that in our culture or with our own people, most of us are trying to eradicate our roots or our indigenous roots, and most of it starts with our names. If you meet someone that is of really like brown skin that you would call 100% Mexican or 100% from the country, usually their names go like Juan or Benito or Jose or Pedro, and people assume they're Mexican names, not realizing they're actually Spaniard names. So, you would have names such as what are some indigenous names like
Like Huitzili, like
Huitzili.
Tlacaele.
Yeah, a bunch of them. Like you can tell, like they have like the TL at the end, or they have like a XE or a X in the name. Um,
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but I just so
yeah, no,
people don't, if anyone listens to this, that goes more for like Nawa. Well, if you go down more south, you start hearing more Mayan names with more K, right? I think if you
yes,
go like to the Zapotec, you start hearing different from Nawa and Maya.
yeah, and it seems that we sort of have some shame for what we name ourselves. As soon as we get the chance, the opportunity, and we have kids, we we don't give them a name that would typically fall into our actual culture. Chinese people have their names, their actual names from China. And then when they immigrate to the States, they change their name to an American name, but they still have that native or the Chinese name, or other places like Indian people as well. They have it's hard. That's why their names are so hard to pronounce, because they keep their real names. So it's like for us, it's like as soon as we get the opportunity to get like an easy name, and like I said, it's not to cap on anybody. Like you can name your kid whatever you want. I really don't care, but it also affects the fact that we don't even keep our own culture alive. Like what are we? And that's the thing. Like I there's it feels like there's a bigger meaning to your name when it's an indigenous name. And I mean, I don't know. I feel like we should definitely bring that back, or we should definitely keep part of that.
I was gonna say, I think when you mean that, like your name, your name is a Spanish name, right?
Yes.
And I think when you're saying like, oh, like it doesn't have any meaning, but it does have a meaning. I think it doesn't have any meaning to you because you're not Spanish, right?
Yeah.
Your culture is indigenous, so it wouldn't really make sense. Like, like if I don't come from like the Greeks, but I take a Greek name, but I'm not
Yes.
really part of that Greek culture, all that stuff. It feels like, why do I have that Greek name, right? Like I'm not even part of their culture. I'm not. What do I
Yeah.
have to do with being Greek, right? Like the name might totally be cool and whatever, but it's like it feels better when you're like you were saying something about like the Chinese when they come here, right? It feels good when you have a Chinese name and you're Chinese, right? Because that's your culture, right?
Yeah.
That's what you're representing, right? But it's like
Hmm.
for us being indigenous, it's like, my name might be a Spanish name, right? And it's like it's not tied to my culture, right? The Spanish name would be tied to Spanish culture over there in Spain, even Portugal and Italy, because they all come from the Latins, right? From like
Hmm.
the Romans, because they're all Latin languages. Just the way like in England, like they're tied to Old English with Germany, right? They're more Germanic languages.
Do
But
you
it's like,
think all? Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
oh no, what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, do you think that when people hear us talking about, oh, like we should use indigenous names, this and that, do you think they assume like, oh, does that mean I have to change my name then? Like, I mean, changing your name on a legal state, like legally talking, it's a pain in the ass, because there's so much paperwork you got to go through. So, like, for the people that already have an established name and shit, like, thinking of them having to go through that process, what would be the thing they would have to do? Or what would be the closest thing to changing their name?
Okay, so first off, what I hear a lot of people do, or a lot of people say,
Mhm.
that are more that have done their research, they try to tie their roots to kind of a tribe, right? So
Okay.
they actually do their genealogy and they try to see like, oh, was my ancestor a Tlaxteca, or was my ancestor a Mexica, or a Zapotec, or where do I come from, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I would say, at least from my perspective, I would say it doesn't matter. Like, I'm not saying go claim to be this tribe if you don't even know where you're from, but it's
Mhm.
like, if your name is a Spanish name or a German name or a name from somewhere, you already don't have anything to do with it, right? So it's
Right.
like, if you want to take a Zapotec name, I personally think they would see it as an honor, right? Because you're claiming
Yeah.
a name that's important, right? And you're showing great appreciation. You're taking the name, and you might even get ridiculed for it, but you have it as something that you appreciate. And you're
Yeah.
also indigenous, right?
Mhm.
Well, if you take like a Greek or Roman or any type of, you have nothing to do with them, right? But nobody would question you. But I think there's this kind of stigma that, oh, you can't claim to be Zapotec, right? But if you want a Zapotec name, I think that's fine. Or any type of even Mayan name or whatever, because those
Yeah.
names are dying out, right? I think you could choose any name. It don't matter if you're from that tribe or not, because you're taking that name with honor, right? You're not taking
Yeah.
that name to ridicule it or whatever, and you're
Right.
indigenous, right? But I would say first think if you want an indigenous name, right?
Okay.
Like, if your name's already like James or Theodore or whatever, and you like that name, then more power to you, right? But if I would say, if you want to feel more indigenous, more connected to your cultural ties, like, think about what it would mean to you to have an indigenous name. Just the
Yeah.
way what it means to have a Chinese name for a Chinese person, right? Like a Japanese person has a Japanese name, and their names have meaning to them because it's tied to their culture. Just the way,
Mhm.
if you're indigenous and you have an indigenous name, it's tied to your culture, right? It's tied to how we used to read, right? How we used to talk to each other.
Yeah.
So I think an indigenous name has a lot of meaning for indigenous people because they're culturally tied to those names. So in the sense of, like, if you were to change your name legally, if you really like an indigenous name, go for it. Even if it's a lot of hassle, legally people would have to, I mean, nobody has to call you anything, but at least they could respect what to call you.
Yeah.
And you would have it on your license and your legal papers. But something I want to talk about is, I think from my perspective, and I can't talk for any tribe, I can't talk for any leaders, because I heard that's kind of how it goes, like the leader, and they still have like that, they're still tribal, like very tribal, like they have a leader, they elect them, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
For like tribes in Mexico, but I can't speak
Mhm.
for most of them. But at least from the documentaries that I see on YouTube and videos,
Mhm.
they want to keep the language alive, right? Like, who doesn't, right?
Okay.
But it's like, when you hear them like describe themselves, right, when they're doing the interview, and they're like, my name is Jose Enriquez, right? And I'm a Mayan.
Yeah.
And then he's like, I love Jesus and the Virgin Mary, right? And he's like, but I'm Mayan. And then, to me, it's like, are you really Mayan though? Like, what makes you Mayan, right? Like, the culture itself is what makes you Mayan, right? Like the
Mm.
language, the religion, your name, right? That's what a Mayan would be, right?
Yes.
Culturally, I would say, right? That's what someone would consider themselves a Mayan, right?
Yeah.
Because that's a culture, right? Like, you can be indigenous, right? You're just indigenous, just the way someone can be black, right? They're just black. They just happen to be black, right?
Yeah.
But then in Africa, everyone's black, or at least back before. I mean, well, I'm not gonna complicate Africa because it's a little bit more complicated than just everyone's black. But in the sense of like in Africa, there's a lot of tribes too. You know, not everyone is Zimbabwe, right?
Yeah.
Or Zulu, right? But everyone would be both of those cultures would they people would consider them African, like black,
Hmm.
right? Just like here, like you could be Cherokee or you could be a Mayan, but you're both considered indigenous. You're both Native American, right? If you
Hmm.
get put together, you wouldn't see a difference, right? You'd be like, oh yeah, they're both Native American, but you couldn't be like, oh, he's a Mayan. You could tell he's a Mayan, or oh no, you could tell he's Cherokee. Like you can't tell
Yeah.
someone if they're Cherokee or Mayan just by their looks because they're just indigenous. But back to the whole kind of thing that I have with people and keeping the languages alive. It goes back to the names that you were saying. It's like if you want to keep your language alive, but your name is not Mayan, and this goes for the Mayan language or any language. If your name isn't, part of your language, and neither is your like religion part of your language, right? Because Maya is for like the Mayan religion.
Yeah.
It's like what makes you Mayan, right? And why would you want people to keep it alive or your sons or your kids when you're already showing them that your name is Spanish and your religion is Spanish and the only thing missing is the language, right? And it's like it's more beneficial to speak Spanish if your name's already Spanish and your religion's already Spanish. You would even have a better job opportunity in the main cities, right?
Right.
Or going anywhere in Central or South America because they only speak Spanish, right?
Hmm.
So it's like there's no benefit to learning an indigenous language, even if you're from that culture, because everyone already speaks Spanish, right? It's like if you go to YouTube, there's not like a Mayan, like quote unquote, like a Minecraft player and he speaks Mayan, right? There's no
Yeah.
movies and they speak Mayan, right? As far as I know, right? Or
Hmm.
you don't go like you don't go on YouTube and be like Minecraft playthrough and someone speaking in Nawa, right? So it's
Yeah.
like what benefit is there for you to keep speaking those languages, right? And I think it just gives more fuel to the fire if your name isn't in your language that you're trying to preserve, right? Like it doesn't make any sense if you're trying to preserve a language and your name isn't in that language and you don't even follow the religion, right? Like if you don't
Yeah.
follow Tlaloc or you don't follow the old ways, it's like what incentivizes someone else to learn the language, right? As someone that doesn't know a lot about tribes from Mexico,
Hmm.
and they say I want to keep the language preserved, what would be your advice to them?
Generally, people find it more of a chore
Okay,
to
perfect.
learn a new learn language.
Right. So
So the problem would be convincing people into just learning a language.
right, right, definitely, I can agree with you. So
Hmm.
would you say it would be beneficial? Like, okay, an example, anime, right?
Hmm.
Anime took off and now almost everybody and their mother wants to learn Japanese and they
Japanese, yeah.
go to Japan and they love the Japanese culture, they love the language, right? And yeah, like people might say like it's a little bit cringe that it was anime, but it's like so what, right? Like they're
Yeah.
keeping their culture alive and their language. Now a lot of people around the world want just practice Japanese as a hobby, right?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah, I
think
mean, even myself, like I got I wasn't much of an anime fan, but as soon as like I felt like I was watching anime like on not on a daily basis, but it was like a large percentage of the media that I consumed. And in my head, I thought, well, if I'm gonna be watching something from a different country, then I should probably learn the language as well. Because I mean, for myself, I feel like it's important to learn at least the language of somewhere or someone's culture that you enjoy. So, like, in a form of, at least for me, it's a form of respect because it's like, okay, you're taking the time to learn the language so you can fully grasp. I mean, it's impossible to fully grasp the meaning of their language if you're not fluent or born there, but you grasp the majority that people don't because, I mean, many people go around and just literally just talk one language. I mean, for us, we're kind of forced to be bilingual. And I mean, in many areas, that's actually benefited us more than it's actually affected us. Nowadays, it's actually less beneficial for you to have only one language on your resume.
Like I don't know the science behind it, but I know
Mm.
what language you speak kind of your perception change, and also if you know different languages, your mind opens up more. Like your brain starts opening up new fucking like I don't know you would call it like neuro.
Oh yeah,
You know
they're
what I mean?
neurons, neurons,
Yeah,
yeah.
like they open up new neurons and stuff like that. I
Hmm.
hope I'm sorry if I don't have the correct signs, but around there, if you know more languages, your brain, you know, becomes better basically.
So it's beneficial to you in the
Yeah,
real world per se, and it's beneficial to you like for your, what would it be, for your
I
for
think
your phys-
for
for
your
knowledge.
for your identity,
Hmm.
because it's like a lot of people feel this thing where like, and now we're gonna get into a different subject, and this
Hmm.
subject I'm very passionate about, so I hope some people see it and could kind of give their opinion on this, but it's like the whole thing with like no Sabo kids or
Okay.
the ridicule of people that don't speak Spanish here in
Yeah.
America. I think, at least to me personally, makes me so angry because it feels like the Spanish one, right?
Hmm.
It's like it feels like the Spanish one. Like you have Native American, like indigenous people telling other indigenous people, "Hey, you're not really a Mexican because you don't speak Spanish." It's like a Japanese person being like, "You're not really Japanese because you don't speak English." And it's like, how does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Right? It's like, how
But I
does that
mean,
make any sense?
yeah. And but I mean, isn't that, wouldn't is it's the language that was passed through by, I mean, everybody in most of our families. If we don't have a direct connection with indigenous people or indigenous family members, the it's probably going to be Spanish, the language that we're speaking at home. So I mean, by tradition, people are just going to be like, oh, just speak Spanish. Isn't it easier just to speak Spanish than go and learn the, like, an indigenous language?
Yeah, I can disagree with you on that. Like, yes, it's easier to just learn a language that's passed down to you,
Hmm.
but then that's hypocritical because people that are born here and they just speak English, it's the same thing, right? Where it's like, well, isn't it easier just to speak English because you rarely use Spanish here, right?
Oh yeah,
Unless
because it's the
unless you have relatives that speak Spanish, or you want to order something in Spanish, right?
hmm.
It's like you really don't use any other language besides English, right? Unless you're in that community with more Spanish speakers.
Okay. So you would say the counter argument would be like, then don't speak any other language aside from English if you're in the U.S., or if you're in any other country. Don't speak the language except the one that's mostly spoken, because you're not going to use it.
No, I'm saying for people that are saying like, "Oh, you should speak Spanish." Like you said, okay, you just said something that's passed down to you, right? Like it's easier to
Yeah.
speak something that's passed down to you. It's
Hmm.
like it's easier to speak English because that's what's passed down to you, right?
Yes.
In America, at least, right? Like
Hmm.
if you're born in America, like if your kid's born in America, and like we speak English, right? But we also
Hmm.
speak Spanish, right? But it's like we're not going to talk to our kids in Spanish. We're going to talk to them in English, right?
Hmm.
So just there's no sense for us to teach them Spanish unless they know, like unless your mom wants to talk to them, right? Or our mom.
Yeah.
right? So it's like, yeah, well, I understand what you're saying. Like, it's just easier to pass down a language you already know.
Hmm.
But it's like, sorry, I keep saying, like, the whole argument is that, at least my argument, is that the Spanish won just the way Canadians and America won, in the sense of like, kill the Indian and save the man, right? That's what the residential schools were for, right? They
Yeah.
taught their culture and their language. They cut off their hair, and they like wanted them to be Canadian or Americanized. That's why the phrase is "kill the Indian, save the man." So it's like, don't learn your indigenous language, don't learn your indigenous culture,
Hmm.
forget all of that, right? That's what the schools were for.
Yeah.
And you didn't have that necessarily in Mexico, but you had a caste system in Mexico where it was like, if you're indigenous, you're at the bottom. But if you mixed with a Spaniard, oh, then you're in the middle, right? And if you speak Spanish, that's even
Mhm.
better, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's kind of the same thing. It's like, kill the Indian, save the man. Like, kill their culture, right? That's what they
Yeah.
want. They want our culture dead. They want our languages dead. So it's like, now our own people are still doing their bidding, right?
Yeah. We're doing it for them, or
Exactly. And it's like, even though we separated from Spain, the reason we separated from Spain was because it was like the elites from Mexico, which were still Spaniards, that wanted to separate, but we kind of tagged along. We're like, yeah, right. But it's like, we still have that sense. Like, a lot of people still have that sense of like, they might feel like they're mixed or they're still
yeah.
Spaniard. But it's
What
like,
about?
you see
No, go.
people that are hollow brown,
Hmm.
right? Or you see people that are like, how we like to say, tiene el nopal en la
In la
cara,
frente.
en la frente, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, bro, you're indigenous. Why do you want me to speak Spanish? Right?
Yeah.
It's like, it makes
They're
no
not
sense.
realizing that they're actually.
And the funny thing is that they hate like European people, right? Or there's this stigma with like European people, right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, like the white person did this to us, right? And it's like, but you're for them. Like, you're literally you're for the imperial
Hmm.
Spain, right? You still want us to speak their language, right? It's like, you're
Right.
literally for them. Like, you're not for your own culture, you're for somebody else's, right? What they forced upon us, you still want to force it upon your own people, right? That's what no Sabo is, right? Like, no Sabo kids, like, why aren't you speaking Spanish? It's like, bro, what are you from fucking Spain? Right? It's like, what are you from Spain, bro? Like, why would I have to speak Spanish? It's not
Yeah.
like we invented Spanish; it was brought to us, right? So it's like, you don't if you don't speak Spanish, bro, cool. Like, who gives a fuck? It's like, it doesn't matter whether you speak Spanish or not, because it's not our language. It's a European language, just like English, right? The only difference between Spanish and English is that one is Latin and one is Germanic. But even then, English already has Spanish, right? It already has Latin in it,
Yeah.
right? Like 30% of Latin is already in English. That's why English sounds the way it does now, right? Because
Right.
if you want real English, you go back to the old days, it sounds like German, right? Like pure German.
Hmm.
But now we don't sound German. We sound like a mix of Latin with English. That's what it is,
Yeah. I remember
right?
we had a conversation about how you said that people talk Spanglish, which is a mixture of Spanish and English, and you said that this is what English is. And at least for me, it kind of like, I mean, I thought Spanglish was just like saying la troca, or, dame una chanza, or um, instead of saying te apoyo, you say te soporto. which technically translate to I tolerate you. So it's like I thought that was Spanglish.
Yeah, I mean that's Spanglish because it's like Spanish and English mixed together. But
Hmm.
it's like English is already kind of Spanglish, right? Because it's already mixed, right? Like like Spanish has already been a thing in Europe, not in Mexico, in Europe, right? That was brought 500 years ago. But even before then, Spanish and English have already, or Latin, have already been mixed, right? They've already been mixed.
So you're saying that like English, the English language you speak right now is like a more
It's a
what?
mixture with Latin.
Okay, but it's like a more, what is it? Would I say more proficient? No, like a more smoothed out version of Spanglish then,
Um,
because like I said, Spanglish to me is like just literally mixing words that are English with Spanish. But you're saying that
so I
English
just
is a
Googled right
mixture of.
now, right? I just
Mhm.
used Google, and what percentage of the English language is Latin? And it says over 60% of all English words have Greek or Latin roots.
Okay.
So, what is Spanish? What a language derived from Latin, right?
Okay. Right.
I saw this video from a girl, and she's Mexican. She's from Mexico, and she asked Mexicans what do they think of Mexicans from America, and they said, oh, they speak Spanglish, like they mix Spanish and English, but it's like
Yeah.
that's already a thing. That's just English,
Hmm.
right? Like we've already mixed. You've been mixing it, right?
Yeah.
And it's like because Spanish is not ours, like, and there's also this stigma where it's like if a white person doesn't speak Spanish correctly, it's like, oh yeah, like I could tell because you're a gringo or a gringa or whatever. But it's
Yeah.
like, bro, that's their language. What, like, what do you mean? Spanish is a European. It's a European person language, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not a brown person language. It's a European. We speak a dialect of Spanish, but it's not our language, right? Our
Yeah.
language would be like Nawa or Maya or Zapotec or something, right?
Hmm.
One of the 64 languages in Mexico that are indigenous. But it's like when Spanish speakers from Mexico are like, "Oh yeah, I could tell you're a Grigo," or "Oh, te crees güero." It's like, "No, you do too. You speak a European language. What do you what are you talking
Yeah.
about, right? Like if I go to Mexico and I'm talking like this, right? They're like, "Oh, like te crees güero, te crees, te crees
Pocho.
allá." Yeah, and it's like, "Bro, so are
Mm.
you. Tell me, where does Spanish come from, bro? Right? Where does Spanish come from? Spain? Okay, what are Spaniards? Europeans, right? They're white, right?
Yeah.
Or at least we consider them white here in the Americas, right? I know
Hmm.
there's a whole thing with like white people don't consider other white people white, right? But at least here we would consider them white, right? From our perspective, at least.
Yeah.
But it's like the whole thing with Mexicans being like, "Oh, you think you're from, you think you're white." It's like, so do you? Do you speak Spanish? And you ridicule other people that don't speak Spanish. You're just the same as like people here that ridicule other people for not speaking English. Matter of fact, you're even worse because you're claiming someone else while not knowing you're doing the same thing,
Hmm.
right? It's like how what is the irony in that? Like the irony is so it's just so it's like it's so frustrating, right? Fuck, bro.
Yeah.
It's like how can you not see the stupidity in that, right? Like, you're telling someone else like, "Oh, you think you're white?" It's like, bro, you're the one speaking Spanish to me, right? At least I know my history, and I'm trying to
Yeah.
revive an indigenous language. But you're over here telling me, "Oh no, you think you're white?" It's like, so do you, right? Like, do you know an indigenous language? No, right? So then, what do you think you are, right? It's like if you speak Spanish and I speak English, and they're both European, aren't we both thinking we're both European from your perspective? Right? Isn't that the logic? If you only speak English, you think you're white. Well, if you speak Spanish, then you must think you're white too, because that's also a European thing,
Yeah.
right? It's like, fuck, bro.
Why is there so much hate amongst our own people? Like, most of us complain that, oh, this group of people is oppressing us, or this other group of people is oppressing us. But when you really look at the scheme of things, we're the most racist towards our own kind.
I
And a
think
lot of people don't want to admit that.
I think a lot of people don't want to admit that because they it's like it's confusing, right? It's like on one side you're Mexican. It's like the Mexican or our people have been confused since the arrival of the Spanish because at least from my perspective and my knowledge as of today,
Hmm.
you have you have someone that's called Mexican also get called Hispanic and Latina
Right.
and also get called indigenous. Because if we go back like maybe 200 years ago, right? Even in the independence of America and all these things, they understood that Mexico was just indigenous, right? They knew that the Spanish really didn't do what Canadians and the United States did to their populations of indigenous people, right?
Hmm.
Like Spanish kind of failed in that. So you even have it in one of the writings, I forgot who, I think Thomas Jefferson or something, where they said like Mexico is indigenous. Like we don't want Mexico, but we want California and all these things. Because if we take Mexico, we know that we have to incorporate the Indians into our system, right? Into our legal system when we don't want Indians. So even then back in the day, they recognized Mexicans as just being indigenous people, right?
Yeah.
As Indians as we're called, right? But it's like nowadays they don't recognize, and even we ourselves don't recognize that we are Indian or Native American or indigenous. We are now called Hispanic and Latino, and because of the caste system of people calling being called mestizo, a lot of people now consider them mestizo as being mixed, even though some people may not even be mixed, right? But they would just consider themselves mestizo if they don't speak the indigenous language. Right?
Yeah.
If they don't follow anything indigenous, they call themselves mestizo, even though they may not even have a drop of Spanish, but it's just kind of the norm now to be called mestizo if you don't follow an indigenous thing. And then that kind of goes back to the food, right? It's like, but our food is indigenous. How are you not indigenous? And you look indigenous, right, bro? Like anywhere you go in the world, you're gonna be called like, oh, you're Native American, right? They're not gonna
Mm.
mistake you for a European. They're not gonna be like, "Oh, you're mestizo." I could tell. They're like, "No, dude, you're just indigenous,
Yeah.
right?" It's the same way like Barack Obama. I think his dad or mom, one of them are white, right? But we just consider him black, right? Like he's the
Yeah.
first
It's
black
easier for us
president.
to just say African American.
Yeah, or African American. But it's like that. It's like even if you're mixed and if you just look indigenous, it's like you're just considered indigenous to anybody else.
Hmm.
But if you want to consider yourself like, oh no, like I'm mixed and whatever, okay, that's fine. I'm not
Hmm.
telling you to fucking go by what I say, but at least recognize that other people just consider you indigenous.
Yeah.
You know. But what do you think about like the whole no Sabo thing?
Well, when I was that person that you practically described. I would be that one, that enforcer of hey, you need to speak Spanish because I mean that's the language that we learned, or that's the language that my family spoke ever since I was little, or and I mean I've done it with I mean I yeah I've done it with my brother. My brother now knows Spanish. And in my head, I was like, no, he needs, like, in my head, I was like, I need my brother to know Spanish because I don't want my brother to be one of those no Sabo kids. Like I was very vivid, or not vivid, but I was like very passionate about him not wanting to, or him learning Spanish because I was like, no, like I need this. Like, in my head, I thought of it like I need him to be able to communicate with people from our country. But I never thought like I never sat down and thought, "Oh, I think that our language is actually like in my case, it would be Zapotec." So, like, I'm like, my brother I mean, nobody in my family speaks Zapotec, and I've even asked my family members, like, "Does anybody speak the language, or do we all just speak Spanish?" And they said everybody speaks Spanish. I think that my great grandmother is the one that actually spoke Zapotec, and she didn't know Spanish. So I mean, but after that, everybody just decided to speak Spanish because it was easier. And like I said, like I grew up enforcing that, like saying like I need to learn Spanish, and I went my whole life like feeling superior because I knew Spanish and other people that were from here from the United States didn't know Spanish, and I knew they had Mexican descendants, and I would hear their accent, and I would actually make fun of them for the accent they had speaking Spanish. So so it's kind of funny that now I'm over here sitting down and saying no, like now I'm against it, and it's like we feel like we're doing something for our country, but we're actually
Ex-
going against it.
yes, yes, yes. We're
So
we we're we're literally erasing our own culture. Like we're the enforcers to erase our own culture, right?
yeah,
And
like
it goes back to the names in food, right? Like we start naming the food Spanish. We start naming our kids in Spanish. The language is Spanish. The religion is
yeah,
Spanish. So it's
yeah,
like
we
we're erasing ourselves, right? While complaining that, oh, like,
someone else is doing it.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's like holy shit, man. And I mean, like I said, I mean, a lot of people probably just sit down and think like, why the fuck does this matter? Like, what is this? Why is this beneficial to us? And that's something that my own family members have actually told me. Like, why does it matter? We're in the States now. We're in the promised land. Why does it matter to keep cultures going? And like at least from my perspective, I see that other cultures that immigrate to the United States, they do integrate themselves into society, and they do adopt American holidays like 4th of July. Super Bowl is coming up. So, I mean, that's something I'm excited for. So, I mean, even I myself fall into that. But at the same time, those groups maintain their culture of origin still alive. I see a lot of what is it, like Indian peoples have their shrines, and Chinese people still have, like, they celebrate Chinese New Year's, and I mean there's other there's other cultures that kind of just maintain their whatchamacallit, their traditions from their homeland. And it's like us, some of us do. I do got to give credit to the people that do, because like the ones I do typically see are like Dia de los Muertos. um some of them every now and then I see some September 16th celebrations for the independence of Mexico. It's not Cinco de Mayo, but um
Can I say something about Dia de los Muertos?
yeah, go ahead.
I think it's just. I hope no one. I mean, I don't know how anyone's gonna take this as disrespectful because I actually try to follow the old religion,
Hmm.
but it's like, or anybody even listens to this, but it's like Dia de los Muertos nowadays. It's like a Catholic thing. It's become a Catholic thing
Yeah.
where it's like, oh yeah, like they put a cross and it's like he's gonna go to heaven,
Hmm.
but it's like back in the day, it's like he's gonna go to Mictlan, right?
Yeah.
And it's like the goddess of death is gonna open up the doors, right?
Yeah,
I'm doing it very vaguely, right? I'm kind of
yeah,
explaining
sorry
it
to
very
interrupt
vaguely.
you. What is Mitlan, or where is
Mictlan
Mitlan?
is Mictlan is like it's like you have to do 5 trials and then you go to like our heaven, right? And you kind of become reincarnated, right? You get a
Okay.
chance to become reincarnated 2 years after, right? But there's
Mm,
like different heavens in our religion, or at least in the Mexica religion, right? There's those
yeah,
people know them as like the Aztec, right? But it's
yeah.
like
At
the
least
Day
from
of the Dead is part of the Nawa, right?
mhm.
I haven't done the full history, but I know it's part of the Nahua, or like the Mexica, the Aztecs as we know them. So it's like, but I was gonna say it's funny that it's such a Catholic thing now, but it's like when they go to heaven, it's like if you explain it to like an actual Christian or an actual Catholic, it's like, oh yeah, so they come back, right? Like they come back on this specific day, but it's like
Yeah.
they they'd be like, no, they don't, right? They just stay in heaven. But but to us, it's like no, they do come back. But it's like no, they don't. They don't come back in that religion because that's not a thing, right? In the Bible, it literally even says like no, they don't, right? Like they just stay in the heavens, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. At
just funny
least
that
for,
both religions became mixed, and the Day of the Dead has become more Catholic. I see more like like crosses and stuff, but it's like it
yeah.
doesn't that
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense, bro. Like that's not a Catholic or a Christian thing,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Like
Typically,
that's an
it's like
indigenous
we
thing.
build a. I mean, at least from my the Zapata culture, we make an altar. We put cempasúchil flowers, candles, bread, chocolate, offerings. But
Yeah,
I
and
do
then they
like
come back.
if you Google image like a Day of the Dead altar, like some of them don't have a cross, but some of them actually do have a cross. So I mean, yeah, I mean, slowly we're kind of integrating Christian and
But it's like
indigenous
we're
culture.
erasing our culture, though. It's
Yeah.
like we're kind of pushing it out slowly.
Why does your culture matter to you?
To me personally, I think it's different from if someone asks me why do you think it should matter to me too.
Why should it matter to everybody? Why should it matter to the people that live in the US and not to the people that live in Mexico who
Okay,
would
it
possibly benefit more from this?
why does it matter to consider yourself indigenous?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I mean, there's two ways, right? Two things to this from my perspective, from the knowledge that I know of today, right? Which could change tomorrow, in a week, in a year. But as today, why does it matter to recognize yourself as indigenous?
Mm-hmm.
In Mexico, I heard the statistic was 83 to 85% people are indigenous, right? We're the majority. But we don't recognize we're indigenous, right? And if you look at the presidents that have come and gone, what are they, right? What pigmentation? They're white, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
European. They come from
Probably
European
like
descent,
the first ones that got a little brown in them, but after that it just changed.
right? They're European, right? Even the
Mm-hmm.
governors, even these things, like they're European, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, but if we all recognize, like, oh, hey, you know what? We're the majority. Why is it a European that has no ties to the land, right? That's the whole thing that was with. Um, I think everybody loves this guy, and I think you know who I'm about to talk about, right? You know who I'm about to talk about?
AMLO? No.
No, no. No, this guy is badass. This guy brought the
Oh,
government.
Zapata?
Like, yes, he brought the
Zapata.
government to its knees.
I'm over here
He was
saying
for
AMLO.
he was for land reform, right? He's indigenous.
Mm,
We all know that he's indigenous, right? He was for land reform, right? For like the haciendas to not take the fucking land from our people, right?
mhm,
Because that's what was happening, right? It was a European president at the time, Porfirio Diaz, right? He was a European person, and he was taking the land from indigenous people and giving it to his people, to like the other Spaniards, right? So that's the whole thing with Zapata, right? That he was for land reform. He even wrote a whole manifesto. I still have to read it, but it was about land reform and indigenous rights and these other things.
mhm,
So it's important to consider to know that you're indigenous because you're tied to this land as your father and his father and his father were tied to this land, right? We are the people that are of this land. Just the same way, if you were to go to a Japanese person and be like, why does it matter that you're Japanese or you consider only yourselves Japanese? And it's like because
mhm,
their fathers and their fathers and their fathers were on that land, right?
mhm,
Just the same, the English, right? Their fathers and their fathers were on that land. right? That's the whole argument with kind of Israel. I'm not gonna get into the whole Israeli-Palestinian because I haven't studied on that, but right, I hear that the argument is because they were there, right? So same thing would go for us. It's like we were here, right? 500 years ago, there weren't Chinese, there weren't anything but us, but only natives, right? But now you look at Mexico and it's kind of run by Europeans still, right? Even though we're the majority, right?
Yeah.
And it's like indigenous culture and kind of philosophy is different from European culture and philosophy, right? It's like Native Americans, indigenous people, me and my ancestors, and you look back at codex and stuff like that, like we valued to live amongst the animals. We valued the rainforest, we valued culture, the agriculture, like
Yeah.
the forest and everything, right?
Mhm.
That's literally why one of our goddess Tontonantzin is literally Mother Nature herself, right? But it's like now that it's become more European culture, more European thing, it's like now you have oil companies, now you have all these things that are ruining, right? Mexico. And who's getting, you know, quote unquote, you know, banged, right? Or who's getting the end of the stick? It's us,
Yeah.
indigenous people,
Yeah.
right? That's what's happening to our brothers and sisters here in the United States of America is when they want to build the oil pipes. It's going through their land, right? They have ancestral. And for the people that like Star Wars, it happened in the Boba Fett, right? In the new series, right? With the
Mhm.
sand people, right? Have you seen it or am I spoiling?
I you might be spoiling, but I don't mind.
Okay, so the whole thing is
For
that
the sake of
he,
the
he
podcast.
okay, he gets rescued by the sand people, and then this whole conflict happens with another set of people. And Boba Fett kind of says, you know, they're tied, right? They've been here forever. They have ancestral rights to this land, right? And it's the same thing that goes for us, right? And Zapata knew it, that we're tied to the land, so we have ancestral rights to this land. But if we
Mhm.
don't recognize that we have ancestral rights to the land, like we are indigenous, then yeah, we're just gonna get fucked over by the Chinese, right? Or the Spaniards or everybody else. We're gonna get fucked over because we're no longer tied to the fucking land.
Yeah.
If we don't recognize that we're indigenous and that we already have a different mindset from them, then yeah, right? And it's like there's other issues, right? Like you look at Tijuana, and there's places where people get exploited. It's always our people, by the way. If you look at their skin color, they're brown, right?
Yeah.
They're the ones that get exploited, right? They're the ones that live really poor, right? While you look at people that are like European, they're not the ones getting fucked over. It's us. We've been getting fucked over for 500 years. And it's like until we recognize we're the fucking majority and we gotta put our people in power so we reap the benefits of our land, we're gonna keep getting fucked over. And that's why it's important for you to recognize that you're indigenous. Because if you don't
Mhm.
recognize you're indigenous, you're gonna keep getting fucked over because they're just gonna keep calling you Hispanic and Latino and that you're mixed. Oh, you don't have any ties to this land. At least from my perspective, that's why I think it's important. Because if they recognize that we're getting together, we'll recognize that we're tied to this land. Like Mexico is gonna see a huge difference, right? Because we're
Yeah.
gonna start putting people that are indigenous in power, and their mindset is gonna be different, right? Instead of European, because it's like what happened with Portfolio Diaz, right? With like he was exiled, right, and he left. He just went to Europe. He didn't give a fuck about the land here. He just left, right? That's what
Mhm.
happens. Like they don't give a fuck, so they leave. They go to Europe, right? But it's like we need to put people in power. But how do we put people in power if we don't recognize we ourselves are indigenous? We don't recognize that we're the majority, right? If people don't care that they're indigenous and they're the majority, then no one's gonna really vote. No one's gonna give a fuck about the political power, right? So it's important to recognize you're indigenous So you can put people in power that's for your benefit, right? That's the whole thing in America also. It's like, why do you think white people want to keep white people in power? Because they feel like, well, if we put a black person or someone else, they're not going to look for our interests, right?
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. I know that race shouldn't be a thing, and I totally agree. Like, race shouldn't be a thing. We should just look out for the human race. And I wish it was like that, but it's not, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's just not. So we have to put people that look like us, that are for our benefit, our cultural ties, our ancestral ties to the land, so we can benefit from it, right? And so we can help our other indigenous brothers that are maybe more tribal mindset, right? Because more people are just becoming nationalists, right? More Mexican nationalists, right? But even the nationalist people have to recognize they're indigenous. So the more nationalists can help the more tribal people, right? Like people that are like, no, I want to live more tribal. It's like, okay, that's fine. And we're going to help you. Not because you're tribal, but just because you're indigenous. You're part of our culture, right? The Zapotec, the Chichimec, right? The Mixtec, the Mixtec, they're part of the Mexican culture and they're indigenous. But people that live in the city don't consider themselves indigenous, so they may not put someone in power that will help our brothers and sisters that are more tribal and kind of stay to their own, which is fine. There's no problem with that. But if we don't recognize that we're indigenous, we will never put anyone in power that benefits us, right? There's going to be no benefit for us. And I think you can look at the past and you can see it's mostly been Europeans because they're the ones that took our land, that took our gold. So they're the ones that are going to be in power, right?
Mhm.
I've been ranting for
Yeah.
like 10 minutes, so
That was
I,
sounded like a whole presidential what is it? Presidential speech right there, man. Damn.
look, man. I love Mexico. I used to hate Mexico when I was taught here in America. I used to hate Mexico, and I didn't even want to be brown, and there was self hate. But then when I did my own research, I looked up what happened to my people. I was like, bro, I'm literally like messed up in the head. Like, but it's
Yeah.
because we weren't taught. Like, education wasn't free in Mexico, right? So our parents weren't giving the opportunity to learn their own culture, to learn their own history, right?
Mhm.
Because back in the day, we had Tlatoanis, right? We had our kings, our generals, our leaders, right? We had our empires, our warriors, right? But we're not given the chance to learn that. Why? Because it's a European thing to not teach the poorer people. Keep them poor, keep them stupid, keep them dumb. We need workers.
Yep.
We need slaves, right? While the Mexica, the Aztecs, they were like, no, everybody needs an education. We need smart people, right? To expand the empire. That's a Native American thing. That's an indigenous thing. To have education for everybody, that's an indigenous um, philosophy, right? Just the way the
Yep.
Greeks invented democracy, right? We invented for ourselves education for everybody. And by the way, the Mexica never imposed their language on anybody. Like they, as far as I know, I might be wrong, but I don't think they ever imposed Nawa on anybody. They allowed our other indigenous people. I know that they had conflicts with other people and stuff like that that were also indigenous, but in the sense of like that's just war, right?
Mhm.
That's just war. But they never were like, no, you have to learn Nawa. You have to stop speaking Maya or Zapotec or whatever, right? They never were like that. From my knowledge, I might be wrong. But going back to the sense of like education, like it's an indigenous thing for us to be educated. That was taken away from us by the Spaniards, and it still is. Like, look at Mexico. You still have to pay to be educated, right? That's not something that should be allowed. And especially when we're the majority. How the fuck are we letting this happen when we're the majority? Right? When we're the majority, we should be putting people in power. Like Mexico, you look up on on YouTube and you can type in why isn't Mexico a superpower? And the first thing that comes up is corruption. We could literally be a superpower, right? We could be taken serious by the UN, right? We could actually pose a threat to the UN, right? We could be like Russia. Well, we shouldn't be like Russia, right? Like we should try to threaten anybody, but like we could be a world
No
power.
Tommies, okay?
Yeah. We could be we could be imposed as a real threat, right? We could be taken seriously in world talks, right?
Hmm.
Because right now, nobody takes Mexico seriously. Everybody
Yeah,
thinks of
nobody
Mexico
does.
as like, oh yeah, it's just filled with cartels and like, oh yeah, like it's just dangerous, right? And
Yeah,
sombreros and tacos and tequila, like that's all Mexico's known for, right?
they don't send their best.
They don't send their best; they're sending their worst.
No, yeah, I mean, even yeah, I mean, if you if you talk to people from here that don't typically travel to Mexico, they have a pretty negative image of Mexico. And I mean, the news plays a lot of that too as well. I mean, when they're constantly reporting about how someone else got shot, which I mean it happens sadly, but you know it's definitely not making Mexico look nice. But yeah, sadly, a lot of that government has a history of being corrupt, cops being very handsy with people, very bribe accepting, and is it's a messed up system. Everybody is kind of like on their own out there. They either do the same thing and stay alive, or they get screwed over, and I mean, end up victims. I mean, fuck. It's sad. It's a dog eat dog world out there, for real.
Yeah, and I would say, why do you think it's like that, right? I mean, we're the ones that got fucked over, right? So why do you think it's like
Yeah,
that? Why do you think it's always the brown person that's bad?
yeah.
And even in the
I
media,
mean,
the brown person is always in the media in Mexico. Who's the fucking cleaner, right? Oh, go get this person from this pueblo and let's have her clean. And it's always the white people that don't have the haciendas, and it's always our people that are cleaning up after them and taking care of their kids.
oh
It's
yeah,
never
you're
us in
talking about
power.
novelas, right? You're talking
Right?
about
Yeah, in
novelas.
novella. Every Mexican mom when they first came here loved, right? Back in the day when there was nothing to fucking watch, it was the novellas, right?
Yes.
Nowadays we don't even watch novellas, right? It's like we watch something else.
My mom does, but I do notice that though. I do notice that a lot of the roles that play like successful family and stuff is typically lighter pigmentation people and like
No, they're
the ones
European. That no, that let's call them what they are. They're European.
or European then and like the people that are like doing like the maintenance, the yard stuff, the drivers, the fucking milk person, everybody, they're all like brown. They look like your typical mom or dad or like I don't know, man. Like it's obviously portrayed what they're. It's obvious what they're trying to
Yeah,
do.
and I don't know how people don't get angry, right? It's like,
Yeah.
dude, that's you, right? It's like we're the majority is looking at that, and it's like, oh yeah, yeah, that's okay.
Or if you go to like a Mexican restaurant and they got like a charro painted on there, or they have a picture of a charro, it's typically a European person on like the like wearing the hat, and then you got the little field worker like with the little hat,
Yes,
hella brown, you know, just
yes, yes.
plowing the fields, you know, making that money for the rich folks. But yeah, no, it's a struggle. That's all I gotta say. It's a struggle.
It's a
It's
struggle because we choose who's the politician. We choose who represents us. And if we call ourselves Hispanic and Latinos, well, then when we choose someone a little bit whiter, it wouldn't make any difference because, oh, you know what? My grandpa was also white, so technically I'm just as white as him. But when he looks at you, he's like, no, you're not. You're not fucking like me, right? It's like
yeah.
they don't look at us like we're them, right? They look at us like we're different, like we're indigenous. You can want to believe that you're European, and that's fine. I really couldn't care. But to the people that are brown and understand that they might be indigenous, you are indigenous. and you'll always be indigenous. Your kid will be indigenous, and his kid will be indigenous, right?
Yeah.
Just as your father and his father was indigenous. And I think a lot of people don't feel like, well, it's like, yeah, I'm indigenous, that's cool. But it's like if we don't represent ourselves as indigenous and we don't tell like the media, right? Like if we don't boycott stuff, like especially in Mexico, it's like, dude, don't watch the novelas. That doesn't represent you, right?
Yeah.
Don't
They're
watch
gonna
things
do
that
it
don't
for us.
represent you,
They're
right?
gonna
It's
do
like
it for us. They're gonna tell us what to be.
exactly that's what's happening. It's like they're telling us what we should watch,
And
what
yes,
we
I'm
should be
talking to
watching.
you, Encanto.
It's like the whole thing with that one actress, right? Like
Yes,
every
Yaritza.
Mexican, yeah, every Mexican actor was like, "Oh my god, blah blah blah," right? And they were angry. And it's like, bro,
Yeah.
fuck you, bro, fuck you, right? You're a fucking colonizer piece of shit, bro.
Yeah,
Right?
definitely.
I
Shout
don't
out
like I don't.
to the homegirl. She's from where I'm from, so like there was a lot of pride from when we saw her out there on I think it was the Oscars, right? Was it the
Yeah,
Oscars?
yeah, I think she won an Oscar for it.
Yeah, and I mean, like for for us as like my family and stuff, it was an interesting moment because we were just like, damn, like we could not believe they actually let someone like that win an Oscar, you know. In our heads we're just like, damn, like she made it, like holy shit, you know. And there was pride in that as well. But at the same time, it was like when Obama became president, you know, or just like
Yeah,
we
I
knew
think that's for like African Americans, right? Like
yeah, like we just for us, we knew that was the last time an actress or someone from
oh no.
indigenous roots was ever gonna get that high because people don't really like that, and we're just like, fuck, man. And now you think about it, and Yaritza is nowhere to be found. She's not. I mean, I haven't heard much from her ever since she won that Oscar.
Yeah,
And
and I
a lot
think
of actors and actresses came out talking a lot of smack, and they was people that you see on these telenovelas, and they play roles that make that are our mothers, and I mean, typically our mothers, because our mothers are the ones that watch novelas.
yeah,
They
yeah.
fall in love with as actors because they play such. I mean, I won't deny they play good roles, but it sucks that that's really what their mentality is because it's like,
It
do you
doesn't
not
suck,
know?
and I'm not surprised.
Yeah, like it's like, do you not know who your audience is? Like, it's literally the people you're talking shit about. And the sad part is, people don't care. They'll still continue consuming.
And I personally think they don't give a fuck because they think they're half of that.
Oh yeah, yeah, I do not
That's
doubt
why
that.
I'm saying it's important to recognize. No, you're indigenous, bro.
Yeah,
When they say "fuck you" to her, they're saying "fuck you" to you too, right? It goes
yeah,
around, right?
yeah.
It's like Uncle Ruckus from the Boondocks. How
Mhm.
he was, he's black, and then he's like, "Oh yeah, no, I'm with the white people." And it's like, no, right? It's like, no, you're black, right? Obviously
Yeah,
that's the whole gag, right?
yeah. But
But it
sadly, there's people that really do act like that, in our at least. I mean, I'm sure there's people that act like that in every culture, but we definitely see that in our culture for sure. Like typically, the people that get like legality here in the US and like they're immigrants and then they suddenly become citizens for whatever the reason, all of a sudden they're against the other people coming into the country and trying to
to improve.
attain the same yeah, trying
Yeah,
to
yeah.
attain the same dream or attain the same like just get the opportunity to be part of this country as well, and they're like, no, send them back, and it's like, bro, you were literally the same thing. Like it just makes no sense how we just continue to keep each other down. Like, and we complain that it's other people, and like we swear by it, and it's like, oh, it's the white man, oh, it's the system, and it's like, no, it's us. It's literally us doing it to ourselves, and we're happy about it. We're proud of doing that. It's fucking sad.
I mean, I think that goes back to your cultural ties and you knowing where you come from, right?
Yeah.
It's like Italians are very proud to be Italian, like Irish are very proud to be Irish, right?
Yeah.
Right, like Indians tend to help Indian. I mean, to play devil's advocate, I don't know if it's even devil's advocate, but I have seen some people that help other their own people,
Hmm.
right? Like if you're Mexican, you're more likely to get help by a Mexican. I have seen the
Yes.
opposite, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely. Especially if you're a little bit browner. Oh, you're gonna get taken advantage of. So yeah, it sucks.
On the flip, no, I'm saying on the flip, I've seen Mexicans help other Mexicans. Like I've seen my
Oh
mom go
yeah.
like, "Oh no, like we have to help her because she's our own, right?"
Yeah.
But then it's like on the flip, I have seen like, no, like fuck them, like even though
Yeah.
we're it's like, bro, what do you mean fuck them? Like they're us, right? But it's like it's that whole thing where we don't recognize, bro, that could be us. We're literally they're us, right? Like we're indigenous, right? But then I have seen where like we kind of stick to our own and we help our own kind,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So I have seen the opposite where we
Yeah,
will help our own, we
there is
will help
still
our own
some
kind.
sense of unity amongst our people. It's not all
Yeah.
negative. It's just that sadly the negative overshadows the good stuff.
Yeah. And I want to talk about one thing before we leave off because it's an hour and 36 minutes in.
Hmm.
One thing that I really don't like about our people is the sense of pride that we have. Right? We might fight amongst our own, but I can't deny that. Fuck, bro, we hate anybody from South or Central America. Like we think of them lesser. I don't know if you've seen this. Like if they're from
Yes.
Guatemala, Honduras,
Yeah.
Ecuador,
Like I don't
it's
even
like
want to use the
holy
names. We
shit, bro. It's
I
like
don't
we think we're
even.
better than them. Like nah, like
Yeah.
you're dogs, right? Like
Yo. Yo.
Mexico's the best. Everyone down, everyone below Mexico, it's like nah, you're literally like the worst.
Yeah.
Like you guys suck.
Like every name we have for them, like every I wouldn't say racial slur, but like I mean, fuck. I think at this point it would be a racial slur. It would get you canceled nowadays
And
because
it
of how.
should, and it should
Yeah,
because that's
and
not
it
right.
definitely
Like that's
should.
not correct.
But
I think we could talk about that in another segment
mhm,
when we have a little bit more information.
yeah.
But just so people do know, if anybody even fucking reaches this part, Guatemala, El Salvador, Ecuador, and I think Honduras, I think all of those used to be part of Mexico. Just the way California, Texas, Oregon, Arizona, and New Mexico used to be part of Mexico, so were they.
Mhm,
There's literally a map where you could see that they used to be part of Mexico. Even the Yucatan Peninsula was gaining its independence from Mexico, and then
yeah.
Mexico didn't want them to, so there was like a little war, and then Yucatan, as we know them, kind of were like okay, like because they even have their own flag once they kind of were independent a little for a couple, I think like a year, like 6 months or something like that. Even Yucatan was going to be independent from Mexico, but we now know Yucatan where it's like Cancun. Everybody knows it as Cancun, where Cancun is. That's the
Yeah.
Yucatan Peninsula. So I think we can get a little bit more into that in another one because we're already
Yeah,
one
definitely.
hour
We
into and 40
actually
minutes.
we actually fit in a good episode in here.
Okay, so we'll see you guys on the next one. We're uploading Monday and Friday. We're uploading every Monday and Friday. So in case anybody becomes a regular watcher, just know that it's gonna be every Monday and Friday
Yeah,
podcast.
expect a video in those days.
Yeah. We'll up I think maybe we'll upload other things, maybe like some at least I'm gonna be uploading on this channel on I don't know if it's Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, but I'm gonna be uploading indigenous games or indigenous
Mhm.
game or games that are inspired by indigenous cultures. that you could look out for on Steam if you want to play them, or
Oh,
stuff like that, or movies that are indigenous, you know?
yeah.
Because I don't see
Oh,
that a lot. Like, I don't see that at all. I don't see people
mhm.
covering indigenous movies or indigenous video games, right? Or indigenous music, right? 'Cause I would like to put a spotlight on indigenous stuff, on indigenous media.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much our end goal here is just to create like a window to what the indigenous culture has to offer. You know,
Yeah.
because not a lot of not I mean, it's beginning to get a bit of exposure, but we'd like there to be more.
We'd like to be normie or mainstream,
Yeah.
as people say, right? Like, we'd like
Yeah.
to see people like that speak Nawa start a Minecraft channel, right? Or start a gameplay channel,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
I think also an end goal, hopefully if this ever became a thing or becomes a thing, I would like to get in contact with Nawa speakers so we can dub maybe these episodes in Nawa, and we could dub other, like, maybe even movies in Nawa, right?
Yeah.
Or anime
Yeah, that would
shows in Nawa. So we can get media, right? So people have an incentive to learn Nawa, right?
yeah.
Because it's like, if there's no media to consume in Nawa, right, then there's no real reason to, right? Just the
Yeah,
same thing
we're
with
just
anime. It's
adding on
like
to the whole Easter
exactly.
everything else, yeah. So definitely we have to
Yeah. And
some
even with games, right? I would hope that I could get in contact with some game creators and have, kind of them implement Nawa, right? The way they have Spanish, maybe even if
yeah,
it's subtitles.
definitely more some. Right now would be like on the interwebs, you know, but
Yeah.
definitely would be nice to see this go out and like you said, make it a normal thing, make it more of a thing that you I mean, it's easy to what you call it. It's not man, it feels weird saying trendy. But, like, we want to get it out there. It's, like, at least for us, it's important for us, and it should be important for other people, you know, because whether they want to accept it or not, it's them. It's really them. It's their identity,
Yeah.
and if this gets big enough, then they'll be able to discover that, and hopefully, I mean, they feel some pride in their origin or something.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, I think that's it. This has been the Avocado Supremacy podcast, and we hope to see you. This one's going to be uploaded Monday, so we'll see you guys on Friday.
Until next time.
All right, see you.